Okay, let's unpack this. We've waded through a really dense pile of source material for you. Everything from, procedural votes in the House, White House memos about staffing, all the way to some pretty serious fiscal projections.
Right.
And our job was to synthesize all that complexity into, well, a clear, high-impact overview, to really distill this whole budget fight down to what you need to know.
Exactly. And what we found, I think, is that this isn't just one thing. It's not just politics as usual. It's really like three different forces hitting each other head on.
Okay, what are they?
Well, you've got the immediate political brinkmanship sort of driving the day-to-day action.
Yeah.
Then there's the strategy of administrative dismantling that's already happening. And underpinning it all is this deep underlying fiscal necessity that kind of gives the politics its teeth.
Right, you can't really get the full picture without looking at all three pieces.
You really can't.
So let's start with the politics then. The surprise, maybe. The House GOP actually managed to unite to pass a continuing resolution, a CR. Now, usually getting the hardliners on board for any spending bill is, well, it's tough.
Yeah, near impossible sometimes.
So why did they suddenly agree this time? Just to kick the can down the road?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. The unity wasn't really about compromise in the usual sense. It seems it was more about faith in a completely different process.
Oh, so?
They basically decided, look, if we can't cut the budget the way we want through legislation right now, we'll trust the executive branch to do it using administrative action.
And that administrative action, that ties into this phrase that keeps coming up in the sources, in DOGE we trust.
Exactly. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. It's become this symbolic thing. You had Representative Tom McClintock, who's a longtime budget hawk, someone who almost never votes for a CR. He actually confirmed he voted for this one. Why? Because he said he trusts that DOGE, which is apparently led partly by Elon Musk, is, and these are his words, calling the shots and wielding the axe on their own.
So, wait. The legislative branch is basically saying, okay, temporary funding is fine because they expect the executive branch to deliver the cuts they want anyway. That sounds, well, unusual.
It does, but the sources show the cuts aren't just theoretical, they're actually happening. Like right now. Already, yeah. While the House was debating procedural stuff, the Department of Education apparently cut about 1,300 employees.
Wow, what percentage is that?
It's roughly half its staff, according to the materials. Part of it's planned to unwind, it seems. And Speaker Johnson was quite open about it, celebrating that these DOGE efforts are important to, quote, downsize the size and scope of the federal government.
Okay, but this administrative action, it's not just sort of quiet downsizing behind the scenes. It's also being used as a weapon in the shutdown fight itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell me about this RIF threat. What makes this shutdown deadline feel different?
It's the threat of permanence. That's the key difference. In past shutdowns, you had temporary furloughs, right? Federal workers were sent home, maybe didn't get paid immediately, but the expectation was they'd come back, probably get back pay.
Okay.
This time, the White House Office of Management and Budget OMB actually directed federal agencies to prepare for RIF notices, reduction in force.
All right, so that means permanent layoffs.
Yes, permanent mass layoffs, not just temporary furloughs.
And who gets these RIF notices?
The direct specified employees tied to programs losing discretionary funding or programs that don't have other funding sources or, and this is crucial, programs deemed not consistent with the president's priorities.
So that turns a personnel process into a pretty sharp political tool.
It absolutely does. It completely changes the dynamic. You saw Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer jump on this immediately. He called the directive an extraordinary ultimatum and a clear attempt at intimidation.
Because now, if Democrats refuse to fund the government under the GOP's terms,
they're not just delaying paychecks. They could actually be triggering the mechanism for permanently dismantling agencies and programs they support.
That puts them in a really tough spot politically.
A brutal spot. They basically have two bad options, it seems. Either provide the votes to pass the GOP's longer-term CR, which likely accepts these administrative cuts, or, as Schumer announced they might try, force a vote on a much shorter, maybe 30-day bill, just to keep negotiations going.
But the risk there is?
The risk is huge. If they filibuster the main GOP funding bill, they could easily end up taking the blame, owning the shutdown, as they say, especially when those permanent RIF notices start going out.
It sounds like the Republican strategy is banking on that, forcing Democrats into that corner.
It seems designed exactly for that political outcome.
And this really highlights something else in the sources. This funding fight isn't just about dollars and cents. Conservatives are using it as leverage, maybe their last chance, to push through major policy changes that aren't directly related to the budget.
Right. They're talking about curbing what they call weaponized Washington.
Okay, let's slow down here. What exactly are they demanding? What kind of policy riders are we talking about?
Yeah, this is the real cost of getting the government funded, according to these demands. And we're not talking small adjustments. These are significant ideological changes attached to a must-pass spending bill.
Okay, give us some examples. What's the scope here?
Well, one big area is definitely law enforcement and the border. The demands include things like fully securing the border, ending catch and release, abandoning the Remain in Mexico policy, standard conservative priorities there.
Right.
But then it gets more provocative. There are demands to, quote, defang the Department of Justice and the FBI. And the source material mentions specific language aimed at gutting parts of the Civil Rights Division.
Gutting the Civil Rights Division through a spending bill rider. That's using the power of the purse pretty aggressively.
Extremely aggressively. And you see the same strategy applied to cultural issues. They're demanding an end to what they frame as the woke culture revolution in the military.
How would they do that?
Through riders specifically designed to block Pentagon policies related to abortion access, what they call abortion tourism, and also riders to prohibit woke indoctrination across other federal agencies.
There was one more major one.
Yes, a prohibition on any new COVID mandates or lockdowns. Again, a policy goal completely separate from budget numbers being forced through the funding mechanism.
Okay, the political chaos is obvious, but this level of brinkmanship, these kinds of demands, it suggests there might be something bigger driving the urgency than just ideology, right? Let's maybe pivot to those sources talking about the underlying economic picture.
Absolutely. I think that's crucial context. All this political noise, it kind of masks a much grimmer reality that the fiscal experts in our sources are pointing to. The U.S. is heading towards a fiscal crisis. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, unless deficits are seriously curbed.
This provides the backdrop for the political fight.
Exactly. It makes some kind of confrontation almost inevitable, regardless of who's in power. The numbers are just getting too big to ignore.
How bad is the debt situation right now, based on these sources?
Well, the main figure is federal debt held by the public. It hit 96% of GDP back in 2022.
And why is that number significant?
Because economists generally see anything above 80% debt to GDP as a drag on long-term economic growth, significantly slower growth. We're way past that.
And it's projected to get worse.
Yeah, the projections cited see it hitting 106% of GDP by 2028. That would be the highest level in U.S. history.
Wow. And what makes this huge debt pile suddenly feel more dangerous now?
It's the interest rates. The era of super cheap borrowing we had for much of the 2010s, that's over.
Right. Rates have gone up quite a bit.
Dramatically. The sources say Treasury yields are currently about 75% higher than the average in the second half of the 2010s. And here's the kicker. More than half of all the outstanding U.S. debt needs to be refinanced within the next 3 years.
Over half. So trillions of dollars rolling over at these much higher rates.
Exactly. Around $15 trillion, according to one source. When you refinance that much debt at significantly higher rates, the cost just explodes.
What does that explosion look like in concrete terms?
Well, the estimates are that net interest payments, just the interest on the debt, are going to exceed the entire U.S. defense budget in 2024.
Exceed defense spending, just on interest.
Yes. And it gets worse. Those payments are projected to be another 36% higher within a decade.
That sounds unsustainable.
It leads to what some analysts call a fiscal doom loop. Higher borrowing costs force the government to borrow even more, which pushes interest rates up further, which makes borrowing even more expensive. You see the cycle.
Okay, so the need for serious, sustained deficit reduction is real. It's not just a political talking point. And the sources suggest spending cuts are the way to go.
That's the consensus from the fiscal experts cited, yes. They argue that, historically, deficit reduction based on spending cuts tends to be less damaging to long-term economic growth compared to large tax increases.
So putting it together, the political chaos, the RIFs, the policy demands, you could argue it's happening against this backdrop of a genuine, looming fiscal necessity for austerity.
You could certainly make that argument based on the sources, that the political tactics, however extreme, are tapping into a real underlying economic pressure.
Okay, this is a massive structural fight then. So let's bring it down to the ground level. What does all this, the administrative cuts, the budget chaos actually mean for you? The person just trying to, live your life, maybe use federal services or perhaps work for the government.
Yeah, the impacts are immediate and very real, very human. Take travel, for instance. The TSA administrator warned that a long shutdown could mean significantly longer wait times at airports.
Okay, that's an inconvenience, but
But here's the thing. Most of those TSA screeners, like 59,000 out of 62,000, are deemed essential. That means they have to work during a shutdown, but they don't get paid.
so the person checking my ID and bags at the airport might be working for free, potentially for weeks, while also worrying about whether their job will even exist because of these RIF threats.
Exactly. Think about the morale impact there. And it hits other critical services even harder, like Social Security.
What happens there?
Mass staff losses, whether through RIFs or people just leaving, would lead to severely long service delays, according to the SSA itself. Wait times for things like disability benefit approvals are apparently already up to 8 months in some cases. Imagine that doubling or worse.
And these downsizing efforts, the DOGE cuts you mentioned, the RIF threats, maybe buyouts, they're not just causing immediate delays, but potentially longer-term damage too.
Yes, there's real concern about a brain drain. Agencies like the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they're worried about losing experienced, talented staff. People who know how to do the complex work of consumer protection or managing spectrum auctions.
And if they leave.
Well, the FCC's own contingency plan for a shutdown said 88% of its staff would be sidelined. Think about that, nearly 9 out of 10 people. Essential work like enforcing rules against robocalls or ensuring competition in broadband markets, it just stops. The government's capacity gets hollowed out.
And just tying this all together, the overall feeling within the federal workforce right now.
The sources paint a picture of intense stress. Workers report feeling, quote, demonized by the political rhetoric. There's huge job uncertainty. And some even see things like new mandates forcing people back into physical offices.
The return to office push.
Yeah, some see that as less about collaboration and more like a tactic to pressure people, maybe especially those hired remotely during the pandemic who live far from D.C., into just taking buyouts and leaving. It's like the system is being engineered to push people out.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the core tension seems really clear from all these sources. You've got this immediate politically driven push to shrink the government, using these RIF threats and administrative tools like DOGE, fueled by ideology.
Right.
But it's happening alongside, and maybe even enabled by, this undeniable underlying economic pressure. The very real need to get the nation's finances under control before we hit a wall.
Exactly. The political actors are arguably using the fiscal emergency or the coming fiscal emergency as both cover and leverage to achieve policy goals they couldn't get through normal legislative means.
So the question for you, the listener, becomes,
Yeah.
are these extreme measures we're seeing, the RIFs, the DOGE cuts, the policy writers, are they a necessary, if maybe brutal, form of austerity needed to fix the finances? Or is it just destructive policymaking done in a panic, causing long-term harm?
That's the dilemma.
And here's a final thought to chew on, building on the sources. They make it pretty clear that without major policy changes, the U.S. probably has about 2 decades, maybe a bit more, to stabilize the national debt before some kind of default, whether it's a formal default or just inflating the debt away, becomes almost unavoidable. So if that's the timeline, and if this current chaotic environment, with a unified House GOP faction and a White House actively using administrative tools to downsize, is the only way to actually force the kind of spending cuts needed, does that make this chaos in a grim way politically necessary, even with all the short-term pain and damage to the workforce? Is the theoretical price of future government efficiency worth the very real loss of accountability and stability right now?